Hi, good morning. I'd like to talk to you for a moment about the good old days. Can you advance my slides, please? All right, so let's start with some quotes. Who knows this quote? Problem well stated is problem half solved. I have to admit that I first read this quote in a fortune cookie, but it comes from a U.S. industrialist, Charles Kettering, and I think it's a very important point. I'm going to emphasize a point later on about how do we address the problems of speed and scale. But I thought this is one of the things that I live by. A problem well stated is a problem half solved. Who do you think said this one? Does anyone recognize this one? If any had an hour to save the world, I'd spend a good portion of that defining the problem and then 5 minutes finding the solution. Okay, we're in pretty good territory. That's Albert Einstein. All right, one more for you. If you want to address the problems of speed and scale, you have to adopt the problems of automation, the solutions of automation and integration. Abe Lincoln? No, not quite. Prime Minister? Nope. So it's this character here. So this is the thing that I live and die for. So I came from an organization, as it was announced earlier, from NSA. And like NSA or not, NSA is really, really good at doing things at very high speed and very large scale. And my message to the community, so I'm fully in the private sector now in a Silicon Valley company, and my message is, if you want to take on the problems of the Russians and the Chinese who are going to come at you at very high speed and very high scale, you have to adopt some new strategies. So there was a day, I don't want to quite call it the good old days, but there was a monolithic enemy, and we knew probably where that enemy was going to come at us, right? If you recognize this map of Europe, that is the Fulda Gap, and it was a strategy, the Soviet or Warsaw Bloc strategy of coming at you at speed and scale, coming in through the Fulda Gap and using that to land and expand in lots of different places throughout Europe. The strategy of coming at you at speed and from lots of different places is not a new one, and I'll get into that in a second. But what I want to recognize today is the moment that, of course, it's no longer about bullets, it's about bits. And the targets these days are not so much the military foundations, but economic foundations. And the aspirations of our adversaries are multiple-fold, right? It's not just affecting, as I say, the military foundations, but they're looking to gain economic advantage, steal IP to gain economic advantage, impose their national will. They're looking to influence public opinion by influencing elections, or otherwise call fear and angst and anxiety of the public. It's not a new idea. So many people know the quote that all roads lead to Rome, right? Pretty familiar quote. And to most people, it means the emperor is omnipotent, or there's lots of different ways to solve the problem. And it's quite honestly, this is literally a picture of a road sign in Italy. There are indeed many roads to Rome, but the lesser known aspect of this particular quote is that these great infrastructures that the Roman Empire built also served as the invasion routes for the Mongols and others in history that led to Rome's downfall. So we're at risk today building these critical infrastructures that we all depend upon, but they can also serve as the roads to our ruin, so we need to do something about them. So the good news is that as a society, we've evolved over the years, right? We all know these elementary school terms, how we evolved from hunter-gatherers to farmers, and we've moved from an industrial economy to a service economy. Today, of course, we're in a data economy, and I hope that's not what we're all going to look like in future years, but I kind of think that we're headed that way. But the problem, as I see it, is that cybersecurity has not had a similar evolution. So what I hope to do with the 4 major points of my conversation with you today is to talk about what is the foundation of cybersecurity as I see it, and what has failed, and what are the compensating strategies and technologies that we need to make sure that we're building towards. I'm a scientist at heart, and I believe that most things can be broken down into fundamental elements. If you can explain most things in the world in terms of chemistry or physics. And so I'm trying to take that approach right here. So I think it starts with speed. If you're not doing cybersecurity at the highest possible speed, you're in the wrong ballpark. I'm mixing metaphors. Fundamentally, security slows people down, like it or not. So we have to be the fastest possible slower downer in the world, if you know what I mean. It's not a very eloquent way of saying it, but speed kills. Unfortunately, a couple decades ago, I'm going to focus on that failed foundation now. Several decades ago, the, quote, inventors of the internet didn't get some things right, including authentication. So in many ways, we're compensating for some of the earlier failures of the construction of what's now known as the internet. So there's some fundamental strategies we need to absolutely embrace and do superbly, and I'll talk about some a little bit later on. But that's the blue section down low. It means we have to do access control really, really well with precision and with great agility. The previous speaker talked a little bit about cryptography. Some of the more advanced strategies, hinted about also as well, have to do with visibility, because oftentimes it's not the hardware or the software that's failing you. It's the human beings, I call it the wetware. It's the limitations of human cognition to make sure they get the bigger picture, manage that complexity, and so that the human beings don't introduce risk they don't plan. So there's several strategies we need to adopt, and I'm going to focus on a few of these in the rest of my presentation. So strategy number one, speed. Fundamentally, I believe that security without speed results in operations without security. The example that I like to point out is there's a technique called break and inspect, or SSL decryption. Fundamentally, because the boundary, quote, is going dark, meaning with the increased use of encryption, number one, and number two, with the likelihood that adversaries are going to make it inside your network, then it's going to be really, really important strategies to adopt SSL break and inspect, to look for evidence of covert command and control, to look for evidence of exfiltration of information. The products that the industry are building today are most often too slow to allow break and inspect at cyber-relevant speed. So these great security features that would enable you to look for insiders or penetrations isn't being used. So we really need to build architectures around speed. This is not a problem that has just come up today, right? Human beings have been looking ways to accelerate their speed for a long, long time. Some of them practical, some are kind of silly. The same's true in machinery, right? So this is I believe, well, I don't get this wrong. I'll just say it's a middle-age cryptography system. This, of course, is the bomb, the system, one of the first computers used to help break codes back in World War II. I'm guessing that a few people in the audience from the NATO world might recognize this. It's called a STU-2. This is what the state-of-the-art secure telephony looked like a couple decades ago. And of course, this is what modern security looks like today. So when it comes to speed, I would like to encourage us all to think about what can we do to as we're building new architectures, new systems, what can we do to change the paradigm? So it used to be that you had a CPU, and you leverage that CPU to build in security around it, leveraging that platform. But I believe that the state of art today is the use of something called SPUs, security processing units. The augmentation of regular old CPUs with specialized chips that you can offload the security processing to, offload some of the network processing to allow you to sustain as high speed as possible as you do these security features. Strategy number two, precision defense. I'm here to declare that the boundary is dead, right? So I'm from the school where you used to build a network, you'd create a really, really hard and high boundary around it, and you defended that boundary very, very strong. And that's just not the way that networks work today, of course. The introduction of mobility, cloud, and some other things, wireless, make the boundary look very, very different today. So as I said earlier, these red line around that entire network represents boundary security, static boundary security. But today, that boundary's disappeared, and we need to redraw those boundaries. We need to redo access control much, much more narrowly focused, and with quite a bit of agility. So today, you might want to create a community of interest in the examples I gave that you're seeing here, where maybe you're limiting mobile devices to certain platforms or stationary platforms to different platforms. You need to be very, very agile and be able to do micro-segmentation, since boundary security fundamentally is dead. You also need to do macro-segmentation, right? What can you do to allow coalition partners to have access to systems or information, and then possibly change that level of access tomorrow. So macro, agile, and micro-segmentation, I believe, is a fundamental strategy that we need to embrace, recognizing that the boundary is indeed dead. Context. One of the earlier speakers talked about the importance of, he didn't use the word context, but I think he used the word visibility, maybe information sharing. I'm going to hit on that with this particular point as well. Context-centric defense. I'm a sort of a closet astronomist, so I'd like to go with a few pictures here, if you don't mind. Anyone recognize what this is a time-lapse photo of? Okay, this is a photo over, I don't know, 30, 40 days or so of Mars in the night sky. And it's pretty neat. Mars is going across the night sky, and next thing you know, it loops back for some strange reason, and then starts back again. Well, the earliest astronomers, of course, said, well, Earth is the center of the solar system, center of the universe, and the sun goes around the Earth. And this is how they explained the observed rotation of Mars. So it's pretty complex. Everything looks pretty cool. It's going around the Earth like all good planets and objects do in the universe. But mysteriously, it takes these loops. Well, sure enough, an instrument was invented. This is, I think, a cartoon of Galileo. An instrument was invented called a telescope. And that telescope suddenly gave much greater precision and visibility to the night sky. So what you see here on the left is Galileo. That's a photo of Jupiter and 4 of its moons. And he observed that in the night sky, and he sketched it out. But then he looked at the same planet, Jupiter, a few nights later, and he saw these dots in different places. And mankind had never seen that before because it didn't have the right instrumentation to see with precision what those dots were. So what he did is he sketched those things out over time, and ultimately he and some other scientists said, well, wait a minute, maybe the model is not that things go around the Earth. Here's a much, much more simpler model. And so only with that great observation, that great context, could they invent a view that makes a whole lot more sense, which is, of course, that the sun is the center of the solar system. So look at the difference between these models. You have that nice, complicated one on the right, and you have that even nicer, clean one on the left. That could never have been done without the right type of instrumentation and context. So I'm trying to pull it, use these other types of graphics to really hammer home the point that without the right level of visibility and without the right level of context, we're going to think that everything revolves around the Earth. It doesn't. So in this particular network diagram, we need to make sure that there's visibility, what's going on at the branch, what's going on at the different campuses. If you have data centers and also at the cloud, you need to have instrumentation at all these different parts of your network. And then ideally, you're going to have those different pieces to pull that view together and create a context to allow you to do mitigation within that context. And lastly, strategy number 4, ironically, but positively, I'm going to echo some of the things that one of the previous speakers talked about, which is the OODA loop. So I started with this, right? My bumper sticker is that in order to address the problems of speed and scale that the Russians and the Chinese and others are going to come at us, we're really going to have to embrace automation and integration in ways that we just haven't had before. It's going to allow us to find things that we would never be able to find because the data sizes are just too big, or because the enemy is coming in low and slow, if you know that term. But it's also going to allow us to act at cyber-relevant speed. The terminology, I don't think it was used earlier, but I think many of you will know this terminology, left to boom, right? So I'll say yesterday's strategies were mostly about hardening your systems as much as possible. But inevitably, bad things happen, and you're left, as they say, cleaning up on aisle 9, a very unsatisfying strategy. And so you want to avoid the boom. You want to stay as far left of boom as possible. So The modern strategy is more about leveraging automation to automatically harden your devices, finding weak configurations, weak patching environments, and automatically executing updates to them. Similarly, automated defenses. And looking just ahead after that, I believe that the next big thing, after we finally get to the place where we're doing auto-defend and auto-hardening, is what I would call auto-resiliency and auto-regeneration, right? So for those inevitable times where you do indeed find yourself right of boom, what can you do to quickly get back to a known secure state and get up and operating again, right? You can't afford to be right of boom for days, weeks, months. That needs to be minutes. So auto-regeneration needs to be part of our future strategies. Similarly, we measure quality of service today on our networks. Why don't we in real time measure the quality of resiliency and detect risks to our resiliency in cyber-relevant time and make fine-tuned adjustments so that we stay as far left of boom as possible. So how do you do those things? You embrace the OODA loop, right? Observe, orient, decide, and act. Those words translated to cybersecurity geekdom is more like sensors, analytics, automatable courses of actions, and mitigations. You need some type of fabric, some type of security fabric to allow your different sensors and analytics and mitigation engines and risk engines to tie together over security fabric in order to achieve that integration and automation I was talking about. And of course, you need to have that context. What's the right, what threats are we worried about? So sometimes we inappropriately pat ourselves on the back when we talk about information sharing. But at best, we're on the left side of this evolution of information sharing. We're sharing fact of incidents, and maybe we're getting better at sharing indicators, signatures, and things like that. But we need to go further along this continuum and get to the point where we're actually sharing the mitigations to actually take care of that incident. We're better yet, let's make sure that we can abstract those mitigations in a way that they're implementable no matter what configuration or system I have there. And even better yet, let's make sure we're designing our systems so that it can automatically ingest those mitigations and then have them automatically implemented. Now, you'll notice that my highest order being here is a robot being controlled by a human. And it often raises this fear. Well, these automated machines, automated course of actions, rise above and do things that we don't want done against our intent. It's not what I'm talking about, right? So there's a way to achieve, excuse me, automation that can keep people in the right place. Sometimes humans are above the loop, sometimes they're in the loop, but for low regret situations, let's go ahead and do the automation that's appropriate. And because it's more about having these machines act on our behalf, act on our control. We don't need to fear automation. All right, so as I mentioned, a key enabler of that is something called a messaging fabric, a security fabric, that allows you to tie together the visibility and mitigation possibility, what's going on at the access points, what's going on at the client, what's happening with your applications, what's even happening all the way up at the cloud. So in summary, whereas it used to be that tanks and the folded gap were the things we worried about, I am a believer in this quote. This is not my made-up quote, but data is the oil of the 21st century, right? Those who can control and verify and get all the right data is going to win the war. We need to have the right analytics in place to make sense of that data, and we need to make sure that we're doing these mitigations, not just static mitigations, but we need to make sure that we're automating them as well. The core strategies are we have to build on a foundation of speed. It's really, really cool to have integration or have these features, but if they're too slow, they will not be used. Our future architectures has to start with a strategy of speed. Number two, let's recognize that the boundary is dead and focus our number one strategy on agile, micro, and macro segmentation. Visibility and context are essential. And back to my original point, unless we take on the problems of speed and scale with automation and integration, we're just not going to be able to catch up. Thanks for your time. Look forward to any questions you might have on the panel after my presentation, or otherwise I'll see you outside. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Phil.